Bannister laughed as the civilians ran from his las shots. He didn't care if they hit or not. What mattered was the fear and the screams. They were a chorus of ecstasy to his ears. The Dark Wolves warband had put Palma Secundus in its sights, and he had finally been given the opportunity to deal pain rather than take it. The screams of the people were a relief, and his fellow cultists a nice reprieve from the muggy air. Bannister was used to the smog-filled skies of his native Praetoria, or any of the other various hive worlds he had helped raid.
"Stop wasting ammo,"
said a deep, booming voice from behind him. Bannister immediately felt himself snap to attention, an old reflex from his days back in the Guard. The owner of the voice was Tarlis, one of the Dark Wolves and the Space Marine in charge of watching his platoon. The rest of the traitor guardsmen snapped to attention as well, not only from discipline, but from the fear that they felt towards Tarlis and his ilk.
"Sorry, my lord, you were just putting the fear of the gods into the corpse worshippers,"
Bannister said nervously. Tarlis was unamused and marched towards one of the cultists standing at attention. With speed that could scarcely be tracked by the mortals among them, he thrust his chain axe deep into the unprepared cultist. He yanked it up hard and fast, sending a shower of bloody mist on the destroyed corpse.
"It would seem you've forgotten how to kill," he sneered. "I do hope this reminder was sufficient, or do you insects require another demonstration?"
"No, my lord, that won't be necessary,"
Bannister gulped.
"You are here to destroy and to collect,"
Tarlis continued harshly, rage behind every syllable.
"Fear is a byproduct of your efforts, not the goal. Now you will fire to kill, or I will remind you again how to do so, mortal."
Tallis pointed his chain axe at Bannister and revved it, flicking blood onto Bannister's nose.
"Of course, my lord,"
Bannister said, and immediately motioned his soldiers to move deeper into the swamp to chase the civilians. His men had to move carefully around the foliage and muck. It felt as though the water was trying to consume them. Bannister's soldiers began grumbling, because they loved creating havoc, but their Space Marine masters had a habit of ruining the mood by reminding them of their place in the pecking order. To make matters worse, they had lost sight of the prey. Bannister's sulking was interrupted by a scream. But it was too close to be civilian. Rather, it had to be one of their own. Immediately, his men swerved to see one of their comrades falling over himself in terror. Bannister went over to check on the issue, his eyes bulging with fear.
"By the gods!"
he exclaimed, and the rest of his men displayed similar levels of panic. The swamp held a forest of dangling corpses, and all of the hanged were soldiers, bearing the marks and signs of the warband. He even recognized a few of the bloated faces as former rivals and comrades. Reality snapped back to Bannister. He whirled around to his men.
"All right, keep your guard up. There could be some resistance here."
The others nodded and gripped their weapons tight. They kept moving further through the wetlands, now far more wary. The dead gaze of his hanged comrades burning into his consciousness. All of his men were on edge. Any enjoyment of this raid was now gone, and his men's murmuring wasn't helping his nerves. The white noise of the environment was broken by one of his soldiers.
"Hey, boss, you need to see this."
Bannister waited over to see what needed his attention. On a pike, sticking out of the ground, was a large, dark gray ceramite helm, unmistakably belonging to...
Ain't that a Dark Wolf's helm?"
The soldier hissed through his own Vox-static riddled helm.
"Can't be.
Bannister snapped, scarcely able to believe it himself.
Nothing can kill a..."
He paused and considered this horrific sight and what it meant. Nothing could kill a Dark Wolf, let alone make a trophy of his helm. No mortal human could, anyway. Unless... Bannister turned to order his platoon.
"Fergus, you'll fight..."
Bannister's blood ran cold. His platoon was gone. Where once 9 or 10 cultists had been, now there was only him and the soldier who he'd been speaking with. He might have panicked then and there, but his thoughts were interrupted by a small explosion. The familiar bark of a bolt gun being fired. There was a sound of a wet pop, like a balloon filled with fluid erupting, and Bannister saw his last comrade, the man he'd been speaking to, slump into the swamp, head replaced by a bloody stump. Bannister finally screamed and sprinted back through the swamp, screaming and howling as he went.
"Tallis! Lord Tallis!"
he bellowed. He had all but run into the superhuman before he realized he was back on dry ground. Tarlis wasn't looking at him, but rather inspecting his crude axe and cleaning gore from its teeth.
"What?"
Tarlis asked disinterestedly.
"They're dead. All dead."
Bannister choked out.
"Who's dead?"
Tarlis snarled.
"My platoon. They're all gone."
Bannister cried, his voice rising in pitch with each word. This gave Tarlis pause. Mortals they may be, but there were 10, and had they all died in battle, he would have heard it.
How many enemies did you encounter? And where did this battle take place?
Tarlis growled.
I don't know. I never saw them. I had my back turned for a few moments.
Bannister was cut off as Tarlis grabbed his neck and hoisted him into the air.
You mean to tell me your whole squad was killed by ghosts then?
No, my lord. I merely...
Bannister wheezed out, struggling for air.
You have failed for the
Bannister's execution was cut short. Tarlis had just seen it. The shimmer of distorted air, the subtle oddness of his surroundings, and he realized too late what he was seeing. There was a suddenly whistling noise of metal moving at impossible speeds and plunging deep between Tarlis' armor and helmet. Blood spurted from the Astartes' throat, and he dropped Bannister to the ground as he clutched at his wound. More shimmers appeared. Tarlis used his free hand to reach for his chain axe, but he never made it, as the shimmers pulled him down and split his skull. As Tarlis lay bleeding out, the shimmering distortions surrounded Bannister. As if melding from the forest itself, the shimmers solidified into Astartes. The Emperor's own angels emerged from the air itself, revealing light gray armor with dark blue pauldrons, a white sword and crescent inlay on the indigo blue. Bannister started to back away until he felt himself back into cold ceramite. Tarlis, now dead. The Space Marines switched their focus to Bannister.
Base! Mercy!
He whined. The largest of the Marines wrapped a rope around Bannister's neck.
Mercy is the Emperor's to give,
one regulator snarled.
Our mercy is the rope, and your fate is to sway from a tree.
The Regulators. The first state to be represented in the Americana sector is none other than my home state, South Carolina. Hailing from Palma Secundus, these guys are masters of guerrilla warfare, particularly in forests and swamps like that of their homeworld. They have developed quite the reputation for themselves as being rather ruthless, even by Imperial standards, as they have been known to make examples of traitors and criminals they catch. As a result, many guardsmen have jokingly referred to them as the Arbites Marines. They are on paper Raven Guard successors, however, due to their brutality, some of the Inquisition speculates that they are actually of Night Lord's Gene C. Like I said, guerrilla warfare experts, which means it is very rare that they choose to engage in melee combat without the element of surprise. Typically, they hang back and pick off enemies from cover. Because of this more tactical way of fighting, other chapters with a more direct approach view them as dishonorable cowards. The Regulators view the other chapters as fracking stupid. As a result, they typically work better with Imperial Guard regiments, who follow a similar combat doctrine than other more traditional Marines. That being said, still have to discuss the darker side. Regulators absolutely despise traitors. They hate traitors more than anything else. From their perspective, Xenos are just inherently evil. So are demons. But humans, on the other hand, you had a choice. You should know better, and yet you chose to be a filthy degenerate. And so now they have to come in to fix the problem. So whenever the Regulators start operating on a world, they'd like to leave reminders of the fate that befalls all heretics. Forests of corpses hanging from nooses is a common sight on battlefields the Regulators have visited. And there is a reason for it. The ritual serves two purposes. One, it serves as a grim reminder to those who violate Imperial law, and two, it serves as a distraction to enemy regiments marching into the area so they don't notice the Regulators' weapons being trained on them. At the present setting, the Regulators' leader is Chapter Master Francis Cooper, who is an interesting individual to say the least. Just like his chapter, he prefers fighting using asymmetrical warfare. He is particularly adept at encircling enemies and cutting off their supply lines. On more than one occasion, he has even sanctioned the use of captured supplies against the enemy. So Traitor and Xenos gear occasionally gets turned against their original masters. This has landed Cooper in hot water with the Inquisition, but since he doesn't hold on to the tech for extended periods of time, they normally don't make a fuss. And when they do get a little extra suspicious, he's really hard to find for some reason. Now, you might be asking, how do I recognize a regulator marine? Well, look at the screen. You're looking at one right now. But let's discuss. Their color scheme is pale blue and silver. They often find themselves in Phobos armor, as again, guerrilla warfare. But they're not opposed to using heavy armor. It's not out of the question, but typically not used unless deemed absolutely necessary. Because getting mechanized units and heavier Terminator-style armor out into these terrain can be difficult. Keep in mind, we're typically fighting in swamps and uneven ground. Not all tanks are made for are made for those kind of conditions.
I've fallen, and I can't get up.
Now for the big question. How are they related to South Carolina? Well, let's take a look. I largely base the Regulators off of two groups of people. The first being the militia that fought in the Southern campaigns in the American Revolution, particularly those that served under Francis Marion, i.e. the Swamp Fox. These men were famous for their use of guerrilla warfare and harassing much larger British units. The other inspiration is that of the actual Regulators of history, specifically the ones in South Carolina, because North Carolina had its own brand too, but there's a little bit different between them, so North Carolina Regulators will get their own video another time, hint hint. Now, see, back in the day South Carolina was a colony. It was divided into two regions, Low Country and Back Country. For a long time, the back country was poorly policed because, well, it was further away from the coastline, and therefore the only court to be found with any officials to prosecute people were in Charleston, which made getting justice to the back country a challenge, which led to a large increase in banditry and thievery and also the odd native attack. So, to combat this, many citizens got together and formed vigilante groups that they called Regulators, or the Regulator Movement. And these Regulators went out to punish any and all criminals they could get their hands on, and maybe some political rivals as well, but that's a story for another time. Regardless, anytime they would catch someone that they deemed as committing a serious offense, they would kill them and hang them. The Regulators, though, came to an end in South Carolina as, slowly but surely, courts started to pop up in the backcountry. However, I think it's important to look at these Regulators as they kind of marked a lot of the political class that would come to be in charge of the state of South Carolina, as many important state politicians when they transferred from colony to state had connections to the Regulators if they weren't just outright Regulators themselves. A good example of this is the infamous politician John C. Calhoun. His own father was part of the Regulators. And to be frank, the Low Country turned a blind eye to the Regulator on purpose. If anything, they actively supported them. And so, it's not as much talked about in terms of South Carolina history. To be fair, most of my audience probably doesn't even know too much about South Carolina history, barring maybe two things from American history. So I wanted to bring a little bit of that more to light. But hey, there's more to it than just direct. There's more obvious inspirations here too. The color scheme, for example. The Regulator use a blue-gray mix. The blue is a reflection of the indigo flag of South Carolina, and the gray and silver because, well, South Carolina was the first Confederate state and spent 5 years as a Confederate state, so I wanted to draw some connection to that. Their heraldry sports a crescent, just like the actual South Carolina flag, but I replaced the palmetto tree with a sword in the center, as South Carolina does have a state sword, even if it got stolen, but I did want to bring honor to the palmetto tree, and hence the name of the planet is Palma Secundus. And Palma Secundus, of course, is very similar to South Carolina's geography, having a lot of dense forests and swamps. Now, the final connection is the chapter master. He is named after two people, Francis Marion and Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper. Francis Marion for obvious reasons, and he is the main inspiration because guerrilla warfare. If you know anything about Francis Marion, you can see the obvious connections. Now, as far as the other connection, Lord Anthony Ashley Cooper was one of the original 8 Lord Proprietors who were in charge of South Carolina, because when the colony was first established by the English, there were 8 guys in charge of it who were supposed to try and make money off it. Anthony Ashley Cooper was one of the few people that actually put a little bit more work into it than the other 7. Hence the reason we have 2 rivers named after him. Regardless, though, that's the main connections from South Carolina to my Regulators. Now, this is probably going to be the standard pattern of how these booties are going to go. After all, if I keep to my word, I have 49 more of these to go. So, did you like the setup of this? Would you like me to change some things? And most importantly, What state do you want to see thrown into 40K next? Write what you want to see down below, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.